Hey everyone, Z-Slayer Dre here, and today I'll be reviewing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, published by Activision and developed by Raven Software, who led the development of the single-player campaign, although Sledgehammer Games, Treyarch, High Moon Studios, and Beanox also shared development credit. I've always been more of a Battlefield player and only played a bit of the Call of Duty series, so I wasn't sure what to expect quality-wise with Cold War. That being said, I've enjoyed the campaigns I've played quite a bit and really loved the Zombies mode, although some maps I've played were definitely better than others. So that brings us to Cold War, which is split up between three main modes, the single player, multiplayer, and zombie modes, so I'll go over each and see how well they did with each one. Let's start with the single player, and while it does seem like a lot of people just buy the Call of Duty games just for the multiplayer, I personally have found them to be quite fun. They're just like a big, ridiculous, over-the-top action movie, and I love it. Cold War is pretty much par for the course, although they had some really tense moments during the campaign that made the pacing of the story just excellent. The story takes place in the early 80s, although there are some flashback levels to the Vietnam War. Raven Software did a great job of capturing the paranoia and tension from the Cold War, and it shows through the over-the-top actions of the main characters throughout the story. This time around, you even get to make a few choices that will actually affect some aspects of the story, something that will add in replay value. I played on both normal and hardened difficulties, and personally I felt like the hardened mode felt better balanced for me, although there are a few spots where normal difficulty will provide some challenge, but for series veterans I would recommend at least setting it to hardened. Also, some of the choices can add in difficulty. For example, it's usually much killer to kill a target over capturing them, which is a choice you will get to make at certain points throughout the story. Like I said earlier, the pacing is well done, mixing in over-the-top action moments with moments of stealth and downtime. Some missions you'll be going against a ton of enemies all at once, and others you'll really feel like a spy sneaking around, gathering intel, so there is some variety to the mission structure. In between missions, you go to your CIA hideout, where you have your objectives board that contains missions and all the intel that you have gathered along the way. Most of the intel gathered is used for two optional missions that you will need to decode and solve puzzles from the clues that you've gathered to help identify targets in the missions, and it will also affect your story. There's of course some twists and turns in the story depending on your choices, and it really was a fun ride. My only real complaint about the campaign is the length. It only took me about 3.5 hours to complete, and that was with gathering all the intel and doing the optional side missions. That being said, I would much rather story be short and sweet than overly long and bloated. I know it will never happen, but personally, I would love to see a spin-off single-player game that built upon the spy intel gathering mechanics into a longer narrative, since the gameplay mechanics of the story were just really fun. Outside of the mission structure and the length, the voice acting was pretty much excellent across the board, which really led to an enjoyable experience. I would strongly recommend playing through the campaign, even if you just buy the game for the multiplayer, since you can basically just finish it in one sitting. Moving right along, let's go over the Zombies mode, which there's really not much to talk about. I haven't played every zombie map, but from the ones I've played, I would rank this one in about the middle, although it did really kind of grow on me as I played it more. Don't get me wrong, the map is put together really well and there's really no complaints I have about it. There's just nothing that really sets it apart from the other maps I've played. It's just a good, solid zombie experience. I know there is a story, but since I haven't played all the previous ones in the series, I can't comment too much on it, but it is there for people who are interested. It starts off fairly easy, but the difficulty can really ramp up pretty quickly. I unfortunately was plagued with games that had people leave mid-match, so it's really difficult to get that far along in it with my limited playtime, but I am looking forward to playing it more. There's two modes you can choose from, one being an endless mode, although you can exfil every 5 levels for a bonus, and then there's the standard 20-round match. I did have more luck finding a game with a 20-round match, so I stuck with that mostly, although I do kind of prefer the endless one. Of course, there will be more zombie maps on the way, and there's also the bonus Dead Ops Arcade 3 map, which I personally wasn't a huge fan of. It's a top-down shooter reminiscent of an arcade machine experience, and I'm sure plenty of people will get enjoyment out of it, but it's just not my, cup of tea. There's also the Zombie Onslaught, but that is a PlayStation exclusive for a year, and I could not play it since I went with a PC version. I had a ton of fun with Cold War, but really anti-consumer practices like that really leave just a very foul taste in my mouth. It's a bigger topic for another video, but it's really not fair to people on the other platforms that pay the same price at launch for less content and have to wait for a year when this game will be thrown to the wayside for the next Call of Duty installment to play that game mode. Anyways, rant over. Now let's get to the multiplayer, which I had no idea what to expect going into, but ending up having an absolute blast with. All of the Call of Duty games I've played before have been with a controller on the PS4, so I was pretty curious to see how well the shooting would feel with a mouse and keyboard. especially since I'm extremely picky about the feel of shooting in a first-person shooter game. And I'm happy to say that the shooting felt almost perfect out of the box. I usually have to tinker quite a bit with the mouse settings, but I almost didn't even need to touch anything, and it just felt right immediately. Most of the weapons have a different feel, and from what I've read on the PlayStation 5 with the DualSense, they even use different haptic feedback settings for each gun, which I am really curious to try out whenever I can finally get my hands on PS5. And I'll probably be going for the Platinum too, because it's just a fun game. Although I didn't get to try every weapon out, since you do need to grind to unlock weapons, something I'll go over more in just a bit. I did notice a small issue with the AK-47U. Now, it could have been lag, although it happened pretty consistently. I did notice the AK-47U had some issues tracking headshots, which led to a few frustrating moments. I didn't notice this, or at least not to the extent of the AK-47U with any of the other guns I tried, so it does seem to be a minor issue, and I'm sure they'll patch it out in the future. From what I've gathered, the minimap was removed in Modern Warfare, but it is back in Cold War. Like I said earlier, I'm mostly a Battlefield player, so having the minimap is welcome, and I feel like it was implemented well. Depending on your loadout, you can earn a spy plane in matches that will show the movement of nearby enemies, giving you the tactical advantage, but on the flip side, there's also radar blocking equipment, so it feels well balanced. Pretty much all your standard game modes are in the game. Personally, I have just a few that I prefer, like Team Deathmatch and Domination, but it's nice to have others in for variety. There will be different featured maps each day, and I found games almost immediately at all times of the day due to the crossplay, which I am really glad they put in because I saw almost no other PC players, so it might have been kind of difficult to find matches if it was platform specific. As far as maps go, while I do generally prefer the larger scale of the Battlefield games, I actually found myself really enjoying most of the maps. One that stood out for me personally was the Armada in the 12v12 combined ARBS mode. There's a few ships you can spawn on, and there's a ton of zip lines, miniguns, and ships you can pilot spread throughout the map. It really felt like a change of pace to the other maps, so there's definitely some variety in there for players to keep things fresh over the next year. I did notice some guns being favored heavily and do think some balance is needed, but it just released, so I'm sure they will tweak things going forward and balance the guns out, so I'm not really too concerned about it. While the unlock system is designed to keep you playing for a long time, I still think it is well done, and personally, I love having a huge system of unlockables, so anyone who enjoys that will have plenty to do. Each weapon can have up to 5 attachments, and there's quite a few options for each slot, so that really adds in a nice layer of depth to the multiplayer. As you level up your main level, you unlock more custom classes and weapons along with perks and killstreak options. One thing I was a little confused by was that on the scoreboard you couldn't see your kills and deaths, only your ratio, and or in some matches just your points. When you get killed by someone, you can see how many times they've killed you and how many times you killed them, but I couldn't find a straight up kills and deaths statistic, so I'm assuming they decided it would be best not to include it, although I could be wrong, I just couldn't find it anywhere. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, although it's minor enough to not really bother me, although that being said, I can totally understand why that would bother some people. As far as microtransactions go, Activision is famous for adding them in later, so at this current time, I can't really comment on it. I really don't like the practice of waiting for reviews to come out before putting in the microtransactions, but without knowing what exactly they will do, it's hard for me to comment on it. But if it is something that concerns you, I would hold off on buying the game till we see what exactly they do for monetization. There will be Battle Pass seasons, which I personally can't stand, but I guess it's better than loot boxes, provided you actually play the game enough to earn the full pass, but that's something you'll have to decide if that's right for you or not. I do have to say there are a ton of camos you can still unlock just through the gameplay alone, so people who choose not to buy the Battle Pass will still have plenty of options for cosmetics. As far as bugs and glitches go, I experienced next to none. The only thing that was somewhat wonky was the AI in the campaign, but for the most part it worked just fine. I'm using a Ryzen 5 3600 with the RTX 2060 and performance was much better than anticipated due to one of the best implementations of DLSS that I have seen so far. On DLSS quality mode, I was able to run the campaign at max settings at 1080p and get between 100 to 144 frames per second. It really looked amazing. I had to tune down some of the settings in the multiplayer, and while the performance varied map to map, it really dropped below 90 FPS. While switching DLSS to performance mode helped quite a bit to get the FPS up to the 120s or even sometimes the 140s, I did notice an issue where using a scope zoomed in, the terrain would get really blurry and at times make it kind of hard to spot enemies. I noticed this also in the balance mode, and while it was still a bit blurry, the quality mode was much better, albeit with a small performance hit. For anyone with an older card that does not have DLSS, you might not be able to get crazy high frame rates, but 60 FPS should be obtainable. but anyone with a better 2000 series card or even a 3000 series NVIDIA or 6000 series AMD should be able to get very high frame rates since the game is seemingly very well optimized. I've heard the consoles are well tuned as well, although I didn't play those versions so I can't comment on those. I'm personally hoping I can snag an AIB model of the 6800 XT this week, and I can't wait to see the extra performance. So overall, I had a really good time playing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and I'll be giving it a 7 out of 10. It's definitely worth playing for anyone who's a fan of the franchise, and I think even people who usually prefer the Battlefield series will enjoy this one, especially if you're like me and have wanted a more modern experience for quite some time. That being said, I don't think this is going to win over anyone who typically doesn't enjoy the COD series, but it might be worth buying on a steep sale if you're curious or want some eye candy for your new console. I still have a ton of reviews to do for this release season. I'm currently working on Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and also planning on doing reviews for World of Warcraft Shadowlands, Cyberpunk 2077, and Yakuza Like a Dragon, so make sure you're subscribed to see those as soon as they come out. I also have a ton of other videos planned, so stay tuned for those. If you did enjoy watching the video, be sure to drop a like, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.